Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Hunter, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the Spring 2022 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I am pleased to present this next session, which will cover the Office of Inspector General. The presenters will be Criminal Investigator Martha Cusak, Investigative Scientist Valerie Hillgren, and Auditor Brittany Moon.
Hello, I'm Valerie Hillgren, an investigative scientist with the NSF Office of the Inspector General, and I'm presenting today with...
I'm Martha Cusak, an agent with the Office of Investigations.
And I am Brittany Moon. I'm a data analytics project manager with the NSF OIG. So I'm going to start off by talking to you a little bit about what an Office of Inspector General does. So our office is composed of an Office of Audits, Office of Investigations, and then we also have an Office of Management and Legal Counsel as well. But I'm only going to talk to you about audits and investigations. So Office of Audits, as the name implies, conducts audits. We do audits of what we call internal audits of NSF operations and programs. And we also do what we call external audits, which are audits of NSF grant recipients and contractors. And then we'll also do financial statement audits and IT reviews throughout the year. The Office of Investigations looks at allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. They look at some research misconduct, and then they'll look for violations of laws, regulations, directives, or policies. In addition to all of that, we also do outreach like this event throughout the year. We'll do presentations, briefings, we also publish some publications and brochures. If you're interested in any other outreach that we're doing, you can find more information on nsf.gov/OIG/outreach. So you're probably very interested in how do we come up with our audit work plan? So there are a variety of things that determine what will be on the work plan throughout the year. The first thing are legislatively required audits. So these are audits that we have to conduct by law. We also receive congressional requests, so things Congress asks us to do an audit of. The National Science Board and also our colleagues at the foundation will submit suggestions for audit ideas. And then the last component are discretionary audits. And these audits are based on internal risk assessments that we conduct to determine where we think are going to be the highest risks throughout the year. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about two types of audits that our office conducts. External audits and single audit reviews. External audits are incurred cost audits. These are audits of expenditures at institutions. We're looking to determine if the costs were allowable, allocable, reasonable, and in compliance with NSF awards, terms and conditions, and also the federal regulations. We use data analytics to conduct these audits. So we do a look at all transactions in the database. We're trying to find anomalies, outliers, any kind of thing that might not be in compliance with any of those rules and regulations. We never, of course, just stop with doing the data analysis. We'll also gather documentation to support anything that we're finding. And then we also conduct single audit reviews throughout the year. So we'll conduct about 8 quality assurance reviews on NSF cognizant auditees. A cognizant auditee is an auditee that spends $50 million or more in federal expenditures during the last fiscal year. And we'll do about 75 reviews of NSF oversight auditees. And these are auditees that spend less than $50 million in a year. The quality assurance work consists of desk reviews and quality control reviews. The desk reviews verify that the single audit reporting is in compliance with uniform guidance and auditing standards. The quality control reviews will verify that the underlying audit work is conducted in compliance with auditing standards. So for our external audits, we have a risk model that we conduct annually to determine who we will be auditing. The external risk model, our office is very small. Office of Audit is 30 to 35 staff. So we use this to determine which institutions we're going to look at. We look at internal risk factors such as ACMS drawdowns, the number of awards an institution has, how much money those awards are composed of. And then we'll also pull in some external data sources such as single audit data, IRS data, And we'll put it all together and we'll rank the institutions based on risk. And then we'll follow that up to determine, has the agency done a desk review recently? Have we audited them recently? And we'll put all the information together and determine which institutions that we will be auditing. So the process for the single audits and how we'll select those, the universe that they're looking at is about 35,000 single audits. So it's pretty big. It has $7 billion in NSF annual expenses. Of those audits, only about 85 of them will fall under NSF cognizant or oversight responsibilities. And those are the ones that might receive a quality control review. We'll perform a desk review on all 85 of those audits, and then we'll pick 2 or 3 for a quality control review every year. Some of the things that we'll look at when selecting these are your single audit results. How much did you have in expenditures, opinions, and findings on the single audit? We'll look at desk reviews and previous quality control reviews to see if there were any findings. And then we'll also look at the firm that conducted the single audit, and we'll look to see, did they have a lot of low risk or no finding auditees. Generally, if we see that there are a lot of no finding audits for many years in a row, it might raise a little bit of a red flag. And then we'll also look at the government audit quality center to look to see if we can improve the standards for single audits. What can you expect if you are being audited? The first thing you will receive is an engagement letter. The engagement letter will define the audit and objective of the, will define the objective and the scope of the audit, sorry. From there, we'll follow that up with an entrance conference. The entrance conference will go over the audit objective and scope, and then we'll discuss the key points of contacts, who you should be reaching out to at the OIG, who at the institution we should be reaching out to, and then we'll also walk you through the audit process and roughly the timeline you should be expecting from the audit. From there, we will start the process of doing field work and conducting the audit. We will potentially use what are called NPFRs, or notices of potential findings and recommendations, throughout the audit. These let you know what you should expect findings wise as we go through the audit work. And then once we are completed with field work, we will issue the discussion draft. And in the discussion draft, it'll have all of the potential audit issues and findings and recommendations that we have. From there, we will conduct the exit conference. We will talk you through all of our potential findings. And you will then have an opportunity to submit your official response to the report. You'll have about 30 days for your official response. Your response will be included in the final audit report in its entirety. And then we will issue the final report, and the final report will be published on the OIG website, as you can see on the slide, and it will also go up to oversight.gov. That is the general audit process, in case you were wondering what it might look like if you were audited. And with that, I will now turn over the presentation to Martha to talk to you a little bit about the Office of Investigations.
So at OIG, we derive our authority from Title V, Appendix Inspector General Act of 1978. Our team of investigative scientists, investigative attorneys, criminal investigators, auditors, accountants, and our amazing support staff work really to detect and prevent fraud, investigate criminal, civil, and administrative matters, address alleged wrongdoings involving proposals, awards, and those who conduct business with or work for NSF. We receive all types of allegations. Some examples might include theft or abuse of government funds, such as using grant funds for personal use or unrelated projects, duplicative funding, which might be receiving funding for the same work at multiple federal agencies, conflicts of interest, plagiarism, which includes intellectual theft, fabricating or falsifying data. We assess the allegations and determine whether they fall under research misconduct or if they violate criminal or civil statutes. Now my colleague, Valerie Hillgren, will go over allegations and the process of investigations.
Thank you, Martha. The allegations that Martha was telling you about, we get from a number of different sources. grant PIs, program officers, review panelists, university administrators, and anyone could confidentially contact NSF OIG if they have any concerns about an NSF grant. And the best way that you can do this is by clicking the big orange button at the top of our webpage that says fraud, waste, or abuse. We'll also provide you at the end of this presentation with some numbers that you could call too. When we receive an allegation, the first thing we do is review it to make sure that there really is a link to NSF. And if we determine there is a link, our primary job is fact-finding. And we do that by reviewing records, interviewing knowledgeable people, issuing subpoenas, and possibly even issuing search warrants in criminal matters. If when we look at the facts, we see that actually another agency's funds are involved, we may refer that to that agency. In the case of research misconduct, we almost always refer the investigations to the university involved. And it's possible in civil and criminal matters that we may refer it to a U.S. Attorney office. In many of our cases, at the end, we will draft a report and refer to the matter to NSF for adjudication. So as Martha said, we look at both administrative cases and civil and criminal matters. I work in the administrative section and work on mostly administrative cases. And our types of administrative cases involve mostly research misconduct. And our research misconduct investigations are governed by NSF's research misconduct regulation, which closely tracks the Office of Science and Technology policy on research misconduct, which defines research misconduct as falsification or fabrication of data and plagiarism. Our office will also look at conflicts of interest and violations of confidentiality in the merit review process and violations of protocols and rules regarding using human subjects in research. Another very important type of case that we look at is retaliation against whistleblowers, and that's something that we're going to discuss a little bit more at the end of the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Martha so she can talk to you a little bit about our civil and criminal cases.
Thank you, Valerie. Now, these are a few of the frequently violated statutes we investigate. We'll go through a few case studies momentarily where you can see how some of these scenarios play out when bad actors violate these laws. Now, there are several potential outcomes to our investigations. For civil and criminal matters, we may refer the matter to other authorities, such as the Justice Department. In those cases, we would work closely with them to build a case for prosecution, which could result in a settlement or compliance agreement, fines, reimbursements, or even incarceration. For administrative matters, we may refer them to NSF, which may result in suspension or termination of awards, suspensions or debarments from government-wide awards, and reprimand or retraction of publications, for instance. Some cases may also be referred to the OIG Office of Audits for further assessment. And of course, some allegations will be disproven with no further action needed. All right, now I'm going to go through some case studies so you can see how some of these things play out. In this first case, a university submitted claims for 5 years and spent excess funds under several NSF awards. Each time an entity requests funds from NSF, they are certifying that those funds have been used in accordance with the award terms and conditions. Those terms require expenditures to be reasonable, allowable, and allocable to the award, and that the university maintain adequate records to support the claims. This case was initiated when the NSF OIG Office of Audit had a CPA firm conduct an audit on this particular university. They found that the university had salary and non-salary expenditures that were unallowable and not allocable, which meant it had nothing to do with the award it was charged to. There was also a lack of supporting documentation for the expenditures, so the auditors questioned the charge. When an entity cannot support charges, NSF can disallow them, meaning the university would have to repay the money. The university did have policies in place to track and support spending through personnel activity reports, or PARs, but they were not being used. The university realized that they were missing the supporting documents, so they asked the research compliance coordinator, they tasked the compliance coordinator, with providing missing efforts reports. That person tasked the PIs with submitting backdated effort reports based on the salary they had been paid rather than the works they actually did. University employees fabricated time and effort records and provided the documentation to auditors. On some forms, the compliance coordinator changed dates of signatures, changed numbers, used old PARs, and changed dates using whiteout and copies. The compliance coordinator kept university officials apprised of the progress in gathering the missing documents. The auditors noticed some of the issues and brought it to the attention of OIG audit, which stopped the audit and referred the matter to investigations. We discovered in our investigation communications that revealed the extent of the scheme at the university. One email stated, "We have no idea how faculty are being paid or how they are parceling out their grants." Submission of false documents and requesting funds for these expenditures that were unallocable or unallowable constituted a violation of the Civil False Claims Act. And under this act, the government can recover treble damages, which is up to 3 times its loss. And there is a penalty for each claim. The minimum penalty was approximately $11,000, up to a maximum of approximately $23,000, which meant every time they asked for money from NSF on one of these illegitimate claims, they incurred this penalty. Ultimately, there was approximately $540,000 in question costs, primarily salary, fringe benefits, and indirect costs. The settlement reached was for double damages, which came out to about $1.17 million, and there was a 5-year compliance plan implemented. The research compliance coordinator pled guilty to making a certification they knew to be false and was sentenced to 1 year of probation. The coordinator was not charged with a felony because they did not actually benefit from the scheme. All right, in this second case study, the university had a practice in place of paying grad students from NSF award money for work that was unrelated to the grant. The award had salary allocated for graduate students working on the research grant, and they did work on the grant. However, they spent part of the time doing unrelated teaching assistant duties, which was required by their PhD program. As I mentioned before, an expense may only be charged to a grant if it's allocable, which means it's incurred specifically for that award. The university was using NSF grant funds to pay the grad student for the time that they spent as teaching assistants, which was unrelated and thus not allocable to the NSF award. So every time that university drew down funds for the time grad students spent as teaching assistants, those certifications were false. We referred the case to DOJ, where it was accepted for civil prosecution. Ultimately, a settlement was reached for $3.75 million, and the university established a teaching assistant fund to pay grad students for their TA time and to help prevent future mischarging to grants. All right, in this next case study, the researcher defrauded NSF by requesting funds for research that had already been completed. The researcher was a founding member of a small business research firm that was solely funded by federal grants. He submitted a proposal to NSF under the SBIR program for a project that he knew was already completed in China. He intended to use this award money to fund other projects unrelated to the research that was proposed. The university associated with the award conducted their own investigation and found that 2 of the grad students on the award were actually in China. He also obstructed the investigation by submitting false timesheets to the federal agents, when he was subpoenaed. A few other red flags emerged. First, the PI had several instances of undisclosed foreign funding on proposals he submitted to NSF. Subawards to the university were not being paid. He had a pattern of putting in for conflicts of interest that were not allowed. And he participated in disallowed activities even after the university instructed him not to. Ultimately, he was found guilty of conspiracy, 3 counts of false statements, and obstruction by falsification. He was sentenced to time served and given 2 years of supervised release. All right, in this case study, it involved a research center with multiple NSF awards, some of which was for a research center in another country, and some of the funds were for the work at the center where the lead PI was. That lead PI controlled all the money from the university at the center. The federal government's grant regulations require universities to exercise control and oversight over the NSF award funds they receive. Among other things, a recipient of NSF award funds must have documentation of salary payments, purchases of equipment, travel, expenses, and all other items charged to the award. The regulations limit cash advances to the recipient's immediate cash needs. Additionally, the regulations require universities to notify NSF of any significant problems relating to financial management of the awards. In this case, the center would invoice the university for expenses approved by this lead PI. The university paid invoices for over 9 years without ever requesting, receiving, or reviewing documents to support the millions being sent to the center. Over 20 of the invoices were advances, totaling $8.4 million, which were not used to cover immediate needs and resulted in accrued interest, which the university did not forward to the government as required. OIG subpoenaed documents related to the NSF awards. The university was unable to support the vast majority of the expenditures. They had also commingled funds and could not determine which expenditures went with which award, which meant the university certified that the expenditures were made for the purpose and in accordance with the conditions of whichever award they were charging, but they actually had no way of knowing it, which would be considered reckless disregard. Each of the 48 certifications they made was a false claim. The issues were identified in a single audit and the university was notified, but they waited 2 years to tell NSF, but we already were aware and investigating the issue because the Office of Audit was reviewing single audits and had referred the issue to us. This case was referred to DOJ and prosecuted civilly, leading to a settlement of $2.7 million to resolve allegations under the Civil False Claims Act. And the university failed to account for NSF research funds. They were also put under a 5-year compliance plan. All right, and for this final case study, I'll pass the baton back to Valerie Hillgren from our research misconduct team.
All right, thank you, Martha. In this case, we'll talk about as an example of what our research misconduct cases look like. This case is an example of the research misconduct cases that we investigate. And in this particular case, an NSF-supported graduate student falsified data, plagiarized from another researcher's dissertation, and committed ethical violations when they submitted a manuscript, which 2 journals ultimately published. The manuscript that the graduate student submitted for publication contained data, text, and figures from another graduate student's dissertation. And the subject used those without telling this other person that they were going to use them and without their consent and without giving them proper attribution in the manuscripts. Further, when the subject submitted the manuscript, the graduate student knew that some of the data was questionable because a compound that had been used in some of the experiments had been compromised. The graduate student also submitted the manuscripts without any of the co-authors' knowledge. And in fact, when he submitted them to the journals, gave fake email addresses for his co-authors. Also submitted the manuscript to 7 journals simultaneously. And as I mentioned before, 2 journals ultimately published the manuscript. When the university investigated the matter, the subject blamed a hostile work environment, improper supervision on the part of their advisor's lack of interest in their work, and also falsely claimed that they had not received any proper responsible conduct of research training, which the university record showed was false. In other words, this graduate student did not want to take responsibility and felt that they deserved a publication after having worked in the advisor's lab. The university concluded that the graduate student committed research misconduct, committed falsification and plagiarism. The university dismissed the student and had the publications retracted. And as a result of this investigation, the university going forward required more training for students. When we reviewed the university's report, we concurred with their findings and we recommended to NSF that they debar the student from receiving any federal funding for 3 years. In addition, we also recommended that for 6 years, the student, whenever they would submit any proposal-related documents, would also include a certification that those documents did not include any sort of research misconduct, falsification or fabrication of data or plagiarism. And at the same time, they would have to get a university official to also assure or also submit documents stating the same thing, that the documents submitted contained no falsification or fabrication of data or plagiarism. NSF agreed and implemented our recommendations. So now that you've heard some of these case studies, some of these things that can go wrong, you're probably wondering how to make sure none of this happens at your own university or at your own institution. And so some best practices that you can implement is, importantly, learn and know all the grants, terms and conditions and rules associated with any of the grants that you receive, and make sure that everybody who will touch the grant in some way is trained in their roles and responsibilities involving the grant. Maintain the proper documentation in support of your expenditures simultaneously with making those expenditures and not after the fact, so that you can ensure that any documentation that you submit to NSF is accurate. And the most important thing, or the bottom line, is that if you ever have any questions or in doubt about any sort of rules or regulations, you should ask your program officer and get their advice in writing. If you have a phone conversation with them instead of going back and forth in email, follow it up with an email reiterating what you discussed to get that written confirmation. I'm going to shift gears now into another important function of our office, which is whistleblower protection. A core value of our office is protecting NSF employees, contractors, award recipients, and subrecipients from retaliation for reporting any wrongdoing. Federal law prohibits retaliation for providing information reasonably believed to be evidence of a violation of a rule, law, or regulation, a gross mismanagement, a gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to the public health and safety. NSF employees, the contractors, grantees, subcontractors, subgrantees are all protected if they make these disclosures to their management, to us, to our office, to OIG, or to Congress. And you can find more information about whistleblower protections on our webpage, www.nsf.gov/OIG. If you have some specific questions or concerns about whistleblowers, you can contact our whistleblower ombudsman, Bill Kilgallen, at this email address at ombudsman@nsf.gov. For other questions you might have or for reporting wrongdoing, you can contact us at these phone numbers on the slide here or through our website, www.nsf.gov/OIG. You can even mail your concerns to our physical address. And if you're just interested in what's going on in our office, you can follow our Twitter account, but please don't tweet allegations at us there because that's not the purpose of the account. That wraps up our presentation. Thank you for your time and listening and attention, and we'd be happy to take any of your questions now.
Thank you for that presentation. I now ask that my colleagues join me on camera as we go through the questions. Okay. Can you talk a bit about the OIG's role in general and its relationship to NSF and its programs? That's open to anyone.
So I guess I'll take that one. So the Office of Audits oversees NSF programs. So we conduct audits and assessments to just evaluate how well programs are doing. Investigations looks into allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. And the OIG is a separate independent entity from the agency entirely, since we are auditing and investigating them. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to elaborate on that.
Good. Okay, so what role does the OIG play in implementing NSF's harassment policy or anti-harassment policy?
I can answer that one. So any allegation that we receive, we will assess it on its own merits using an intake process that we have. We meet weekly and we will look at the specific facts surrounding a case. And sometimes there's intermingled, and so there might be things that need to go to research misconduct or equity and civil rights or to us. But there is a discussion to see if any of it falls into our lane in the OIG. If not, we will refer it to other offices better suited to handle the complaint. And if you're unsure about where to send it, you can always send it to us and we'll route it to the proper entity. That said, most of these like harassment type, bullying type allegations would more appropriately fall under the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. But if you go to our website, you'll also see that information there and a link to them. So like I said, you can always route back to us and we can get it to the right place.
Thank you for that. And when we talk about findings, can you tell us why are findings not reported in the Federal Register as done by NIH?
I'll take that. I'm presuming that the person is referring to the fact that the Office of Research and Integrity for NIH, when they do research misconduct investigations, they usually on their website also publish their findings and name the people. And part of the reason they can do that is because they're a somewhat different entity than we are, and they negotiate their settlements, whereas we are actually a law enforcement agency. So we have somewhat different processes and rules that we have to follow. As far as where our results of our investigations are published, we publish semi-annual reports, which you can find on our website. And if somebody is debarred or there are more serious, findings made against them, criminal findings, and they're debarred from receiving federal funds, their names would be just like with NIH or any other agency in the system that's called SAM, which Martha, do you remember what SAM stands for? I can't think of it right now.
Systems for Awards Management, I think.
Yeah. System for Award Management. One system for award
right. So anyone who's debarred, whether it's via NSF or any other federal agency, they would be listed there.
Okay, and speaking of debarred and issues as such, those who are found in violation of NSF policy, are they allowed then to serve as reviewers, and can they be hired as NSF staff?
So I'll take that. When a finding is made against someone, usually and sanctions are levied, and among those sanctions are normally a bar from being a reviewer for NSF, or acting as a consultant or in any way for NSF. And it's usually for a certain time period, anywhere from a year to 5 years. In some very extreme cases, longer than that. But yeah, so for a period of time after a finding has been made against someone, they are barred from reviewing for NSF, acting as a consultant or working at NSF.
Okay, thank you. And what beyond the PI's word should provide evidence of expenses being necessary for the execution of the award? In your auditing experience, what are some successful systems that you have observed?
I will take that. So whenever the auditors go in and they're conducting audit, they will request documentation for whatever they can. And a lot of cases, we will actually talk to program officers at the agency and see if you have gotten approval for that equipment at the agency as well. But we are not scientists as auditors. And so we are not often, we're not going to determine the scientific merit of an expense that you have. It's more of a reasonableness test, I think, in most cases. And then, let's see, on successful systems I have observed. I just think generally having good accounting systems and also having the documentation on hand. I can't say that I have an example of any specific system. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. And how long does a typical case take to investigate? And can an investigator or awarding institution, awarding organization still conduct research during an ongoing investigation?
Okay, I'll take that one. Okay, let me make sure I answer the question. Okay, so I would say that there's no typical length to an investigation because it really depends on the exact allegation and then what is found in the course of that investigation. I would say many times it's a few months and we find that that person is exonerated. And so there is, it's easy and quick to close out. There are other times where it takes years because it's one thing after another, and we have to close all those loose ends. We might find something that's okay, but then we might find something else that is not okay. So there is no good answer to how long does a typical investigation take. I would say for the other portion of that question that if you can go on conducting research during an ongoing investigation, that's fine because it's until there's a determination been made or of misconduct or some kind of suspension or debarment or administrative action that suspends the award, you can continue to do your research because we don't prejudge the outcome of the investigation unless anybody has anything else to add to that.
I could add just a couple. So from my end, typically I'm working on research misconduct cases, and those, before they're finally all wrapped up, it's over a year usually, because what happens is we normally refer it to the university to actually do the investigation or to do an investigation, and the university has 6 months to do that. And then once they send it back to us, we have 6 months to review what they've done, review all the evidence, gather more evidence if we need to write our own report. And so that's at a minimum if nothing goes wrong and people don't need extensions or anything like that. And I just add one other thing to what Martha said. As she said, normally during this whole investigative process, no one is barred from continuing to do research. However, in some very certain, what we might consider particularly grave cases, we might go ahead and suspend the award before we've come to a finding because we have such concerns, or even during an investigation, if there's something that we feel particularly puts NSF at a threat, someone might be suspended as a reviewer or something like that during the course of the investigation until we come to a completion. But that's rare. As Martha said, normally, you're presumed innocent and until the investigation is complete, until a finding is made.
Okay, well, I will ask a question, or just ask that you speak on this. It was mentioned earlier about if you have a phone call with a program officer and you get, the response you receive, and you mentioned following up with an email to confirm. Can you talk about the importance of that? I'm in the policy office and we have a lot to do with, making sure we tell people get things in writing, have NSF prior written approval or things of that nature. We are sure to say in writing. So will you talk about the importance of having it in writing versus ending it with a phone call?
Hey, yeah, I can take that. Yeah, we run into this all the time. In fact, one of the first cases I had when I joined the office was somebody told me, I'm not going into all the details of the case, that, well, I talked to my program officer and we worked out this deal. Well, first of all, this deal was something that was like absolutely against NSF rules. And there was nothing in writing. And I went back and talked to the program officer, and the program officer was, I would have never told them that because that's against the rules. Sometimes program officers might give wrong advice. In this case, it turned out not to be true, but sometimes program officers might give some advice that's maybe not entirely correct, although I hope not, but it happens. And then if you go off and follow it, or you misunderstand the advice that a program officer has given you, and you go off and follow it, and all of a sudden you find yourself in trouble, you say, but the program officer told me that. From our perspective, if you can show us an email that says, something like, you write back to the program officer after your call, thank you for speaking with me on the phone today, what I understand from our conversation is that I'm allowed to buy this equipment and pay this graduate student, or whatever your issue might be. And then the program officer just says yes. Then, you know, if for some reason maybe you shouldn't have been able to pay that graduate student or something, in the end, you're not in trouble because you were acting in good faith. So, you know, having that email follow-up lets us, know that, even if maybe perhaps a certain expenditure shouldn't have happened or something, that you were acting in good faith on the advice that you had from the program officer.
Thank you. And I think I may have missed this question, so I'm going back to it. What other types of documents or systems are acceptable forms of support for salaries or wages outside of an after-the-fact effort certification system?
So I'll speak to that since that's sort of an oddity question. I will say I am a data analyst. I don't typically conduct the actual audit work, but what I will tell you is you will be in communication with the auditors as the audit is conducted, and they will let you know if whatever you have provided will be sufficient. And that's about it as far as I can elaborate on that question. I don't know if my colleagues have anything else.
Okay. There's no more elaboration on that. So is there any advice you all can give or anything you can help people out with, having systems in place, having, established policies and procedures that they follow that they can cite, or anything like that you want to talk to our audience about to be sure they have in place?
Well, I'll just say that having policies for how you conduct things in place is always good, because if nothing else you can point to saying, look, this was our policy and we followed it. Just speaking from sort of my bailiwick, we really like to see when, we hate when we get an allegation of research misconduct and we refer it to a university and they don't know what to do with it because they've never done this before. So it is really great. The best investigations that we see done by universities are ones that have a policy in place. They studied the policies of other institutions, and they're familiar with the research misconduct regulations, and so that they have policies in place about how they're going to handle those kinds of allegations and how they're going to conduct those investigations.
And also applying the policies consistently, correct? As opposed to choosing which type, this particular one, you want to adjust the policy a little and then not apply it in the same way. So that's important as well, correct?
Definitely.
Okay, is anything else they need to walk away with? Any other question that was not brought up or was not included in the presentation, or that you would rather elaborate on that was in your presentation? And audience, if there are any questions that now are popping to mind, we're still open to receive questions. So fire away if you have them.
I'm just kind of scrolling through here, and there's looks like there's a couple of other questions in here that we haven't gotten to yet.
Oh, sorry, they may have come in while I was running my mouth. Hang on.
Oh,
What if you have the email follow up with your understanding, but you don't have a response from them? So you've written an email to confirm the conversation you've had, and you did not get a response from the program officer confirming that conversation.
I'd say follow up to that email. Get that, hey, whatever, your little polite tickler reminder to that saying, hey, I didn't hear back from you, is, that I understand this all correctly, whatever. But yeah, don't just let it drop. Make sure you get the confirmation.
Okay. And is there a time limit to update your policies and procedures after your school has implemented a new ERP system? Not sure ERP.
I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah. So the person who wrote in, will you please write again and tell us ERP system? So while we wait for that, When should a grantee ask the program officer versus Division of Grants and Agreements? POs will often say yes, but DGA says no. Our understanding is that only DGA is authorized to answer compliance questions. Program officers can answer scientific or programmatic questions. Can you clarify? So I will speak to that, if that's okay first.
Yeah.
From the policy office, okay. So DGA, Division of Grants and Agreements, that's where the cognizant NSF grants offices are. And when it's to do with your award, you reach out to your cognizant NSF grants officer, the individual listed in your award notice. So if you have an award, that's where you reach out. If you're preparing a proposal or you're responding to a solicitation, that's the program officer. It also, if it's not solicitation specific, that could be the policy office. But if it's to do with your award, that will be the grants officer. So that will be DGA. Okay. Let's see. Is there a process for reporting misconduct done by NSF staff?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I would say it's the same process as for reporting any kind of misconduct, really. And you can do that. We have an online intake form on our website. You can do it that way. And that's probably the easiest way. But the important thing to remember is if you're going to report anonymously is to make sure that you provide enough detail, because as we assess them at our intake meetings, we need to be able to determine whether we have enough, like, do we know the award number? Do we know dates and activities? And, if you have certain actual documentation that you want to submit, that's also helpful. But to be explicit as possible, especially if you're being reporting anonymously.
Okay. And back to the earlier question, ERP system is the enterprise resource planning application that ties all processes together. So the question was, how much time do they have, right? Where was it? How much time do they have? Hang on, I'm going to find it. Now I've lost it. But how much time do they have after setting that system up for putting their policies in place? Is there a time limit to update your policies and procedures after your school has implemented a new ERP system?
From the audit standpoint, I don't think there's anything I know of that specifically defines a time. I would say that if you have the policy in place, we're not going to audit you to that policy until it is effective. So we'll be using the prior policy that you had to be auditing that. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Are there any specific areas? Everything's moving. Are there any specific interests or focus areas in current or recent fiscal years on NSF awards? What are your top 1 or 2 issues that you see occur most frequently?
So to this, I will say from the audit perspective, you can always look at our upcoming audit work plan. I will put that link in the chat, and that will give you anything that the audit side of the house is specifically looking at for the upcoming year. But in general, I think large facilities are a specific interest area for us.
Okay. Have there been instances where the IG disagreed with the external auditors when the external auditors did not show any findings during their audit?
I guess it's unclear to me what is meant by external auditors.
Okay, so we ask that you further clarify that, please, in the Q&A. Let's see. Are there training modules that NSF recommends for misconduct policy training at the faculty, staff, and administrator levels?
I would say no, we don't recommend any particular policies. We leave that up to you to, search out there's a lot of stuff out there and for you to search out and find what's, might be best for your school or your situation as far as, training people up.
Right, reach out to other organizations similar to yours, look for best practices, but we, NSF and, and IG would not endorse or recommend any, but we would, if anything, recommend just look around for best practices that would suit your organization, correct? Okay. So back to external auditors, the auditors who perform the single audits for an organization, for example, PwC or KPMG, similar to those organizations.
Yes, I'm trying to find the original question.
Right, it was, hang on.
I vaguely remember, but I want to make sure. Oh, have there been any instances where the OIG disagreed with the external auditors? And the external auditors did not show any findings during their audit. You're talking about single audits. So I am not familiar, I'm not as familiar with the single audit process. So have there been instances where they disagreed with them? I'm not sure if there have been or not. I will say we do have a quality control process to review the single audit reports that are cognizant for our agency. So we do look over whatever number each year, but I'm not as familiar with that process, and I'm not familiar if there have been any disagreements in that area.
I know that there is like one case, it was a criminal case where they disagreed with the auditor, but that was, in fact, it was the audit was fraudulent. So, that's a completely, it was the audit itself was fraudulent. So that's a totally different thing than just not agreeing with what the auditors may have found.
Okay, how often are research administrators held responsible for the unallowable transactions? Sometimes they're doing what the PI is requesting, regardless of the type of expense.
So
Yeah.
I guess,
Go ahead.
I guess I'm unsure of what you mean by held responsible. I think that a research administrator is probably not going to be held responsible unless they're committing some kind of fraud. Otherwise, it's usually the institution who is held responsible. And that will go through, on the audit side, we'll go through audit resolution. And so we, as auditors, we will question the costs, and then the agency will decide whether or not to sustain them, and therefore whether or not the institution has to return those expenditures or the dollars.
Yeah, I agree. It's typically, unless there's something pointing to that administrator participating in something specifically fraudulent, then it's really the institutional responsibility, and they're the ones who are certifying typically to drawing down funds and things like that. So while there is a responsibility on the institution to kind of have some oversight of that, I can't really speak to how often an individual research administrator would be held responsible.
Okay. And the award, as you said, the award is to the institution, to the organization, and not necessarily even to the authorized organizational representative. Even though you're the one signing, the awardee is the organization. So that's who will be on the line. So back to the outside auditors or external auditors. What about when NSF hires an outside auditor to complete an audit? Has OIG ever disagreed with those findings?
So I think I know what we're referencing now here. We do hire accounting firms to complete audit work for us, usually on external audits. We oversee the work of those auditors, but ultimately I forget the word, we don't assume responsibility for the findings in their report. However, we do work very closely with them throughout the process of the audit. So I'm not familiar with any instances, I don't know of any instances that our office has disagreed with those findings that they have, if it's for an audit that we have contracted them to conduct for us, if that's getting to the ultimate question here. I'm not aware of any.
Okay. How much training is given to program officers about the administrative side of the grants? Are they knowledgeable about what is or is not allowable, the issue of expenditures at the end of the grant period, for example?
I'm not familiar with how much training they receive on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure about their training.
I know a little bit about their training, but not specifically that. I mean, my understanding just from experience is that a lot of times the if the program officers don't know, they would punt it back to DGA or or something. So yeah, I'm not familiar with exactly how much training they have.
They do receive training. We have program officer training at NSF, and they do receive it as they come in when they first become program officers, and we have it periodically. It rolls throughout the year, and every time there is any policy change, anything that is that is new, whether it's NSF policy or uniform guidance, anything that changes that affects NSF programs, then we do have training, in-house training for program officers. And as Valerie just said, they also would go to Division of Grants and Agreements, or they would come to the policy office with their questions. So they do receive training, and it's pretty often, and it's whenever there is an update. Let's see, any more questions? Someone said, our school just upgraded their operating system, but have not documented the processes for financial transactions. But there's no question there, so I'm not sure if that was tied to having something in writing, or there's nothing beyond that. So I'm not sure if that's what that was tied to. If it's a new processes in place, but they just don't have it in writing yet. I guess the push would be get it documented. Document your policies and procedures now. So let's see. Someone had just a comment. It couldn't hurt to copy the grants manager when you contact the program officer, and vice versa. Okay. We don't disagree with that. So let's see. Any other questions? I think we're nearing the end anyway. So actually,
one more question. Yeah.
There's one more. When those external auditors are hired, are the contracted auditors trained through NSF OIG prior to conducting field work?
So generally, no. We will vet them through when we are putting out a BPA. So when we're looking for firms to hire to do the accounting work, we evaluate their ability to do these audits beforehand. And at least haven't worked with this team as much recently, but at least one of the firms has worked with us for many, many years. And initially they were trained, but I'm not sure about any other firms we're working with. So I would say no, generally they are not, but they are vetted to make sure that they can do the work.
Okay. Well, I thank you for joining us today. I thank the presenters very much for all the information you've given us. So thank you again for participating.